Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Dr. Music Podcast. Once again, thank you so much for my return visitors and my subscribers. I so appreciate you. If you're not a subscriber, please consider hitting that button. It gives me great opportunities to bring you great guests like the one I have today, Miss Gillian Gaar. Gillian is a journalist that
Hello.
has contributed to publications like Goldmine, Mojo, Rolling Stone, and so many more. She has written liner notes for artists like Nirvana, Heart, Pat Benatar, and so many more. And she is the author of more than a dozen books on such iconic artists as Elvis Presley, Nirvana, Bruce Springsteen, Elton John. The collection goes on, so many more. She is here today to discuss her latest book, Queens, A Night at the Opera, 50 Years, celebrating one of the greatest albums in rock history. Look at this thing. Jillian, wow. Uh, it is it is a brick. It is massive, and it's exciting. It's got gold foil. It's just the build on this is incredible. The content's incredible. Jillian, thank you so much for being here.
Well, it's great to drop in.
It's it is great to have you. So much content in here. Yeah, I was so surprised really when I got the book. There's just the build up to the record, the band after the record, bios on each member, so much content. Um, did you do all that research yourself in this book? I mean, there's so much material. You had to be very, very busy for a very long time.
Well, I wish I'd had a longer time and maybe a higher word count too. But yeah, all the content, the writing stuff, that was all mine and all the research I did. As far as the look of the book and the pictures, that was someone else the publisher brought in. Thankfully, that's a difficult job too.
Yeah.
So I'm not responsible for the look, but everything else, the writing, yeah. And well, you can check that out in the bibliography because I try and be good and list the various sources.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that is great. And like I say, there's so much there. Did you know what the book would look like when you started writing it? Do they give you an idea of, did you know it'd be a slipcase and a coffee table book and about 10 pounds? Did you did you know that when you were doing the content?
Well, I've done books for this publisher before.
Hmm.
So first I was writing for an imprint called Voyager Press, and those books did not have a slipcase. But then when did this come out? Maybe it was 2022, I think. The Elton John at 75.
Hmm.
And that book came with a slipcase. So I
Yeah.
thought, okay, all these books are going to have slipcases. So I did know about that. I mean, you don't know
Okay.
how it's going to look. They give you a PDF to do final last minute corrections. But I know one thing that surprised me when I got it the first time was seeing how the spine of the book is in gold. Ooh, that was
Yeah.
exciting. I said, look,
Yeah.
the spine is in gold.
It is that gold foil, like it's just and it is gorgeous. I mean, throughout the book, so many great photos, so much material, little posters from back in the day, old photos, all kinds of memorabilia and patches, and it was just so impressive. The presentation of the book. But of course, a book is content, uh, and you're responsible for that content, that text, and it was so interesting, and it was so well done. Chapter one of the book, it's before the album starts to be discussed. It's in a book in itself. The history of the band, the tour with Mott the Hoople, all the personal bios on each member, the side projects, even. Why did you feel that was so important to tell that backstory when you're doing a book on this particular album? How important was that backstory?
Well, even without the setup, which I'll explain that in a minute, you do have to put some context. You can't just start with them recording the album. You have to give a little background and history. So I would certainly have done some of that anyway. But the publisher, they have a series of books like this. I think they call it the Great Album Series. And the first one I saw that came out in 2023 was on Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon, because it was the 50th anniversary of that album.
Yeah.
And for that was how it was set up. they had the chapter on before recording the album, the chapter on recording it, a chapter on each side of the album, because in those days it's vinyl and you just have the one
Right.
side. So I used that as a template. And the editor never said to do otherwise. So I just stuck with that. So that gives you an initial roadmap.
Hmm.
And I think one thing that I haven't seen all the other books in that series, but one thing that might make mine a bit different is that I think usually after they discuss the album, they just have one chapter covering the rest of the band's career. But I thought it was worth having two because of taking it up to Freddie's death, which obviously a big moment. And at that time, certainly all of us and the band members included, they thought that was the end of Queen. But then, of course, in the new century, they revived not just once but twice with Paul Rodgers and then with Adam Lambert,
And
and just everything else that has happened since Freddie's death. I'd say the biggest things would be Wayne's World and the We Will Rock You musical, and then
mhm.
finally culminating in the Bohemian Rhapsody movie. So I
Yep.
thought that's an awful lot to cram all that in one chapter. So let's break it into two.
Yeah, and it is all in there, which thank you for that. It is really great to have that discussed, because I think it is important in the I think A Night at the Opera kind of, it was not in the middle, but it was a turning point. I think the backstory created that record, and that record created the later story. There was so much of what happened afterwards is because of that record. So it really is a cornerstone of the band, that particular record. This book worked a little bit different for you, I think, from what hear. You're usually approached by the publisher to do a book. You're commissioned to do a book. You sign on or you don't sign on. This one you took to the publisher, if I understand correctly.
Yes, yes, that's
Yeah,
exactly right.
you pitched the idea. That's great. Yeah, tell
Yeah.
me about that.
So yeah, well, I'd mentioned to someone who a friend gave him a copy of my book for his birthday, a birthday present. And so I was saying to him, Stephen, you're going to find more of my heart and soul in this one because this was one that I pitched instead of the other way around.
Hmm.
And certainly, I love it when the publisher comes to you. That means you don't have to convince anybody about the idea.
Right.
They've committed to the idea themselves. We want to do, Bruce Springsteen at 75. Do you want to do it? And so, yeah, it's work. I will take it.
Right.
Yes. But yeah, it is different when it's one that you've pitched yourself. So when the Pink Floyd book came out, right away I started thinking, okay, what albums have a big anniversary coming up in the next couple of years? And so that's how I lit upon Night at the Opera, which does happen to be one of my favorite albums. And I was, around, I was alive when it came out. In fact, I love telling this anecdote because it's fun. So I first saw Queen in March of 1977, what was then called the Seattle Center Arena, the smaller venue. Now it's a rehearsal hall for the opera, which is kind of appropriate,
Wow.
really.
How about that?
But so at the time, this is March 77 that I first see Queen. And 3 months later, my high school graduation ceremonies are held in the same venue. So as I walk across the stage to get my diploma, I was thinking, I'm walking on the same stage as Freddie Mercury.
Yeah, you walked across the stage just like Freddie did. Wow, fantastic.
So yeah, that was my era of Queen. I prefer the 70s Queen. I
Hmm.
didn't like the 80s Queen so much because I thought, they got kind of loud and bombastic. And in fact, I remember when they came to Seattle in 82, I didn't go see them because I thought, oh, well, I've seen them a couple times before. I'll see them the next time. But of course, they never came back to America.
Yeah.
So that was that. Um, and then when Innuendo came out in 91, when I was first playing it, it made me think, oh, they're going back to their old sound because it was more reminiscent of the
Mhm.
70s stuff, and especially the title track, which just
Yeah.
it's so long, so it makes you think of Bohemian Rhapsody, or it did me anyway. And
Hmm.
so,
Sure.
yeah, I like that. I was excited by it, but then Freddie dies later that year.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that was a heartbreaking thing, of course. But
In talking about this, I want to add this. I haven't said this in an interview, but I was thinking, it was a different era. And certainly when I was working on this book and in the 80s when they'd stopped touring, there would be stuff in the British tabloids about Freddie and what was supposedly going on in his private life. But it wasn't like today with the internet. And so unless you bought, the Daily Mail or whatever, you weren't going to know. So it
Right.
really was kind of a surprise, more of a surprise to those of us outside of England
Yep.
to hear that he died, because a lot of people didn't even really know that he was sick because it wasn't all over, the media the way it would be today. There'd
Right.
be a Twitter picture of him or a picture on Twitter of him in his garden or something,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
that just didn't happen then.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's I much prefer the ignorance is bliss way. Sometimes it's
Yeah, yeah,
let
I agree with you on that.
yeah, let people have their own private lives. And there were our wealth of classic photographs in here, all throughout the history of the band, on stage and off, and great photos of memorabilia. Had you seen what the publisher had curated for the book in that respect while you were writing it?
Not while I was writing it, no. I mean, I had a kind of
Yeah.
sense of what they'd do because I've done other books for them. So I knew they'd look
Uh,
and find things like backstage passes, which
yeah.
that stuff is fun to see, the memorabilia, because
Yeah.
all books have pictures and those are nice too, but it just makes it more interesting when you just have all the ephemera in there too, or ticket stubs.
Hmm.
So I don't think I saw the layout until I got probably the first of one or two PDFs. I can't remember how many I got. So I turn the text in, and then they give that to the designer, and they fit it all in and send it to you as a PDF to look at. And by
Okay.
that stage, the text has been edited a couple of times. So once you get the PDF, you really can't make many corrections unless they're minor, like a word misspelling, or kind of
Right.
key, like a missing word in a sentence, for example, or an error. But other things, like you can't say, oh, I want to rewrite that sentence. Well,
Yeah.
no, you can't do it at that stage because it's just all kind of laid out. So that was really the first time I saw it. I knew what it would look like, but it's still very different when you get the actual physical copy.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, usually when I'm covering a book, I'll get a PDF like that,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
it's great. You get the content and you get an idea, but when you're actually holding this thing, I mean, it's just wow. And I'm a book guy. I got stacks of books, and I love to turn the page. I love to smell the paper, and this is it's gorgeous. I mean, it's
No,
absolutely gorgeous.
yes, it does look nice.
It's very, very good. And of course, like I say, the content is there. Um, did you have any input or communication with Brian or anybody in the band or management or anything like that?
Well, these kind of books, I always assume that a band is not going to participate if it's not their thing. And then
Right.
you worry, are they going to get would they get irritated at something you do, and would there be a lawsuit? Which, in this book, it's obviously not controversial, but you never know what's going to set people off.
Right.
Um, so, and plus, there's not that much time. I mean, I can't remember the exact amount, but it was less than a year. I did that all in less than a year.
Wow.
So, yeah, I just relied on previously published stuff. There was one thing though. I got to interview Brian for Goldmine for the reissue of his Starfleet side
Oh,
project,
yeah.
which came out when I was working on this. So, whatever period that was, I forget when that came out, maybe 2023 or so it came out. Anyway,
Yeah.
so, most of the interview has to be about that. That's why they're doing the interview. But
Sure.
at the end, I said, well, I'm going to get in one for me. And I asked him about the song Good Company. So,
Mhm.
because I just thought it was so interesting that, it's really a depressing song. This
Yeah.
older man is looking back at what he thinks is ended up being kind of a wasted life.
Hmm.
And when Brian wrote it, he's, in his 20s. And I just thought it was interesting that a young man would just write something so depressing when he's really, at the start of things, and things are building for him, and Queen is getting bigger, and there's all this momentum. So why do you want
Yeah.
to have this grim story? And he said that he was just projecting. What would it be like, to be this older 70-year-old person looking back on your life and opportunities taken and opportunities missed?
Yeah.
So I put that in there. So
Yeah. Yeah. And you know that song precedes Bohemian Rhapsody.
yeah.
And you know, I found that transition and all through this record, really, the transitions are just brilliant.
Hmm.
Especially at the beginning of the record for me. Um,
Oh yeah.
it is just unbelievable with Death on Two Legs to Lazing on a Sunday afternoon.
Yes, yes. I was
Uh,
thinking that when you said that. I
it's
could hear it in my
unbelievable.
mind.
But you know that transition to "You're My Best Friend," it just it's like the album starts again. There's that keyboardy part from the beginning of "You're My Best Friend" is just it's a spark that just lights up. It's incredible to go from that grit of I'm in love with my car to "You're My it just great. Um, I'm so glad that you had the analyses of each track too.
Hmm.
I so enjoyed that in the book because I'm a person who listens to a record and breaks it down when I listen. The casual listener, I think, does it sound nice? I like that. I go into each sound and it's exciting for me to hear all of those sounds and it was I can see that it was exciting for you. This is one of those albums that has all those little nuances to it and you can enjoy it like that.
Yeah, I mean, actually, it's funny. I had thought, oh, these chapters will be easy to write because I've listened to this album for a half century. I know how to write about these songs. But then when you do it, then it was actually a bit more difficult because it is such a classic album, and these songs have been written about endlessly. So
Hmm.
then I'm thinking, well,
True.
what new can I possibly say about these things that have been written about for so long? So that was a bit of a challenge. You have to get yourself into another mindset. Well, what
Yeah.
is it that you think about them?
Yeah.
So, and
Yeah.
then especially Bohemian Rhapsody with, I guess people could probably write a book on that song itself.
Right.
But I remember maybe I should have, I think maybe I should have got this in somehow. But when that came out, it'll be 75. And I was in high school and I never really analyzed things as much as they do now. And I never really worried what it was about. Oh, what does it mean?
Right.
I never thought that. I just enjoyed it as a song.
Hmm.
I
Yep.
thought,
and
well, maybe nice to go back to that and
and
not belabor the point by putting your own interpretation on it.
Yeah, and I think that was Freddie's intent. He never really explained much of his writing, his meaning,
Which
and
is interesting.
yeah,
He
it
never liked to
really is.
analyze it, and people would ask him not just about that, but other songs.
Yeah,
And he would just say, oh, you should just bring your own thing to it, not or even kind of playing it down. What Bohemian Rhapsody goes, oh, it was just a song I wrote, another song I wrote for the album.
right.
Kind of overlooking the great amount
Okay.
of effort that it took to write it. Or Love of My Life. He said, no, that's not about anybody. It's just this song I wrote.
Hmm.
So,
I think he was a very personal person, and he didn't really want to put himself out there too much. And I think there's a lot of him in all of those songs, and a lot of specifics that he never, owned up to and wanted out there. And it's a great mystery to the Queen catalog too. I listened to Bohemian Rhapsody, and there's still that mystery about it. What are we saying here? What is this? We all love it, but what are we actually hearing? What is the story here? And that's the beauty of it. It's the painting on the wall. This is an album you hang on the wall and look at like a piece of art. It's wonderful. What was the most difficult part of writing the book? The biggest challenge?
I think making sure that I wrote about the recording sessions accurately, because that got a bit more technical. A lot of things I don't necessarily get into all the technical details.
Yeah.
Um, there was a great interview I found with Roy Thomas Baker in Sound on Sound, where they talked about Bohemian Rhapsody mostly, but it just obviously talked about things for the rest of the album, and that was really fascinating because a lot of biographies don't necessarily get into the nitty gritty part of it. So
Hmm.
there was all kinds of things I learned, like that the wind sound in Prophet's song came from an air conditioner that
Yeah.
they used, and how Roy seemed to feel that the album didn't get enough credit for its technical innovations,
Hmm.
and how today if you wanted some of these sounds, you just hit a dial on the control board or something, flip a switch,
Right.
something like that. But that application didn't exist in 1975, so you had to figure out how to do it yourself,
Right.
hands on. Or
Yeah.
how maybe if you listen to, and I think they were talking about Bohemian Rhapsody, that you might hear a few harmonies that are a little off, but it's just because they couldn't fix them in those days with stuff on
Right.
tape the way you might now if you have what 124 tracks and you could just change that track. Or
Yeah. All
nowadays
that.
they'll paste together a composite take from all the different takes people did, but you didn't do that then.
Yeah.
And if you made an edit, you literally had to cut the tape
Yep.
and splice it back together.
Just crazy, crazy. Yeah, now you can throw pitch and everything digital. You just fix it, take a word out, put a word in. It's really crazy. Yeah, and I equate it somewhat to the George Martin uh Sergeant Pepper's thing. It reminded me of that, hearing things about the recording, um, just so inventive. Being able to get these sounds and make them so clean, and just gorgeous harmonies layered, and it wasn't as easy as it is now. That took a lot of effort and a lot of professional musicianship, to understand what works and what doesn't, and how to get that sound, and just brilliant, brilliant production. The one thing this record taught me as a listener is that you can have any genre of music together on a record and have it work.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I got Aerosmith records at the time, and if they did something a little strange, wow, that's not good. We don't like that one. We take it out because the other nine are Aerosmith songs. With Queen, they changed all of that. We get opera, we get pop, we get hard rock, we get the epic progressive thing. We get a little folk with
Yeah.
39, kind of bluegrass-ish kind of thing. Vaudeville. What didn't we get with this record? Pretty crazy. At the time, it had to seem insane. To present this to the record company, they had to lose their mind. What
Yeah,
are you
they
doing
hadn't
this?
put out an album like that really. The others had
Yeah,
more continuity of sound throughout the other three, even though there was some different styles in on those
right.
records too, but not to the extent.
Yeah, yeah, and it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. Um, what's the biggest stone you turned over doing this book? Did you learn anything you weren't aware of? I am sure you learned a lot that you weren't aware of previously, but the biggest thing that you learned about the band or the record while doing the book?
Um, well, that's hard to say. Because maybe it would be all the technical things, like I mentioned about
Yeah.
the wind, the air conditioner, and then just for the voice on Lazy on a Sunday afternoon, or they recorded it, set the signal to headphones, which they placed in a bucket along with a microphone, and that's how they got that sound. And it really seems, well, that's what Roy was talking about today. They'd have just put an effect on the voice
Hmm.
to get that sound, but they had to go
Yep.
through all this effort. Well, looking at some of the stories, realizing some of the exaggerations, there were a couple websites that kind of addressed those and took them down, like on Bohemian Rhapsody, that there were, I think they said 180 or 200 overdubs, and when you look at it, you think, well, maybe not. And it to make a comparison with A Day in the Life, what I think happened was that for that song they had an orchestra, and I think that was a 60-piece orchestra, we'll say,
Mhm.
And so they recorded and they overdubbed it 3 times. So you have the sound of what's that, 240, I think, musicians.
Right.
But you didn't do 240 overdubs. You just overdubbed to get the sound of 240 players. And I think that's what they did on Bohemian Rhapsody.
Okay.
The vocal part in the opera section, certainly, where
Yeah.
Brian and Freddie and Roger would record their parts, but then it would just be, they'd mix it down and then overdub another part, and then you could just repeat that. And so you ended up with the sound of, I'm just going to throw it out there. I don't know what this number is, like 150 voices, when really it was just the three of them, and they overdubbed it 5 times or whatever it was.
Right. Right.
So yeah, that kind of stuff.
Just
Um,
brilliant. Just brilliant. The way they recorded this record. It's just such an incredible record. And the Prophet song has always been my favorite song on the record. And of course, it's kind of a co-number one with Bohemian Rhapsody, because I mean that is what it is, and it's just a masterpiece, of course. But the Prophet song, very much an epic piece, very similar in structure with the vocal canon in there.
yeah.
All the production of that, just the intensity and the length and the progressive nature of it, and the movements, and the voices layering. Just I always felt like that song got lost a little bit.
Well, Brian would agree with you. He felt
Yeah,
that too because of Bohemian Rhapsody. He thought, well, this might have been the big song, although I don't think it would have been as big as Bohemian Rhapsody. You couldn't have got it on the radio, not with that canon section.
right,
They said, "Oh, sorry, that's out."
right,
But what one thing I wish I could hear was, they remixed it in iPart 1 surround sound or something. And I read an interview with Brian where he said, he'd loved that mix, and because that was kind of how he always envisioned it in his head, where the sounds were sort of going around you. And I thought, gee, I wish I knew someone that had that kind of a setup so I could experience it in that way, because
yeah,
that would be fun.
yeah, yeah,
They felt how later, some later iterations had captured more what they wanted to do. And certainly with Prophet Song, he said that. And then both he and Roger said that about the reissue of the first Queen album, just
right,
Queen, it's called
yeah,
Queen, that came out in 73. And they
mhm,
put, a new remix out a couple years ago.
right,
And they were both saying, yeah, this is how we wanted the album to sound. And sometimes I don't always agree with that, with what the musicians say about it, but I do think it's true in this case.
yeah, oh
They
yeah,
said their first album, they weren't able to really get their way and have it come out. And plus, not knowing the terminology that well, not having enough experience in the studio. But now they think, oh, yes, this is much better. And it does sound a lot better.
yeah, yeah. And well, they were so ahead of their time in the way of they thought about their music. I think what they wanted from the music wasn't possible in the studio, and now it is. So I think that's why it works so well. Is when they go back, they can actually obtain what they had envisioned in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
Really great. I want to touch on all of this in the book, and so much more. It would be, 20 hours of time to talk to you and cover everything in the book. There's so much content. It is great. And there'll be links to get the book, of course. The Bohemian Rhapsody film, covered in the book, of course. What was your thought? I saw the film. I love the film. I love the acting. I love the portrayal of the band. I really love the end section with the Live Aid performance, and I thought it was very well done. But the timeline, I'm kind of that snobby fan. I know that this came before this, and why is this here? And it's just not working for me. It drove me a little mad. But yeah, the timeline being incorrect, and there's some things people told me that the film was depressing for them. Of course, there's the sadness, but I found a lot of joy and victory in it as well. But there's many things in the film that just kind of aren't factual too. What are your thoughts about that? And why do you think Brian went that way because he was in full control, from what I understand, of the film. So the inaccuracies and the embellishments a little bit. What do you think his thoughts were with the film, and what are your thoughts?
Well, well, when I saw, I think it was a touring production of We Will Rock You, the musical, based on Queen
Mhm.
songs. I guess they call it a jukebox musical.
Right.
And I enjoyed it, but gosh, even I think it was Roger who said, "Yeah, it's not the best storyline." It is kind of a dumb storyline, but it was entertaining. It was an evening's entertainment.
Right.
But seeing that, I thought, "Oh, okay." They were steering things in a kind of a family-friendly direction. So I expected they'd do that with the film as well. And yeah, I know you compress things in films. You can't tell the whole story, or even in a miniseries that happens. But
Right.
uh, yeah, it does bother me when they feel the need to invent things. And actually, Anthony Summers, this nonfiction writer, he did a very good piece for The Guardian. This was a year or so ago when some series based on Marilyn Monroe's life, but not on her life, really, because we can say it's fictional. He thought there should be a thing called historical libel, where you shouldn't be able to change the facts of a story because people will see
Mhm.
the film and they'll think that's what happened. And
Yeah.
that's what disappointed me in Bohemian Rhapsody. One, I did think they were keeping it more family friendly. Of course, you do that for commercial reasons too. In
Right.
comparison to, say, Elton John's movie, which was much more frank and open about Elton's life. Um, but yeah, I just don't see the need to invent things
Yeah.
that didn't happen at all, just to kind of suit their storyline. I mean, surely you could figure out a way to tell a good story while adhering to the facts.
Yeah.
Like they show the band getting all uptight that Freddie's going to make a solo record when really no one cared. And
Right.
by that time, Roger and Brian had put out their own solo project, so it was not an issue.
Yeah.
Or this drama of him re rehearsing for Live Aid and coming in and telling the band, "Well, I have AIDS," and with this big revealing moment, which did not happen in real life.
Yeah.
Certainly not right before the Live Aid performance, or even on the day of. They want to create this, kind of heartwarming moment
Hmm.
where he comes with his boyfriend. He's on his way to Live Aid. And they go, "Oh, let's see my parents," and so they go, and the father's is a little standoffish, but the mother is warm and accepting, and it's this lovely moment. But it never happened at all. I mean, he didn't go to his parents on the day of Live Aid. He always introduced Jim to his parents as my gardener, which was also true. He did handle the gardening at Garden Lodge, so that was true. But
Right.
they wanted to make it this inclusive moment in the film, and yet that didn't really happen.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I wonder why. I guess maybe that's to make the audience feel better. I've
Yeah.
I've noticed that with films based on a real story, because I've thought about this a lot. Well, really since the '80s when I was watching the Gable Lawton version of Mutiny on the Bounty on television.
Mhm.
Yeah, again, I'd seen it before. And then I thought, gee, I wonder what really happened. So I got some books out of the library and found out that that movie is largely fiction, aside from the fact that there was a ship called the Bounty and there was a mutiny. It's like nothing else happened then. Of course, that's the '30s, and they really just they took the basics and they just sort of wrote their own plot completely.
Right.
Um, and Sound of Music, the same thing.
Hmm.
If I don't know something about the story when I go in to see the movie, it's easier to just see it as enjoy it as a movie.
Hmm.
Whereas if I do know a lot about the subject, like Queen, then
Yes.
the more disappointment set up. Of
Yeah.
course, I was a kid when Sound of Music came out. You're not even really thinking of that, but
Right.
I thought a lot of that stuff was true. But
Yeah.
they didn't hike over the Alps when they left Austria, the Von
Yeah.
Trapp family. They took the train,
Yeah.
but I guess that's less traumatic. They said they were going on tour, which was actually true. They were going on a tour. They just didn't plan to come back.
Right.
So that's how they left the country. And the father, Georg, he never sang with the group,
Okay.
that sort
Yeah.
of thing. So I guess now I'm kind of primed for disappointment. Like when I saw the Amy Winehouse biopic that came
Hmm.
out. Oh, I guess it was just last year. Yeah, nah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Stick with the documentary. That was
Yeah.
amazing. Amy, that came out in 2015.
Right. Yeah, I do enjoy the documentaries, and the Hollywood film is Hollywood.
Yeah,
uh,
yeah.
you know, like the part in Bohemian Rhapsody when he does visit the parents. I enjoyed that heartwarming moment. But I just think of Brian being in control of this, and watching that, and how does that sit well with him? I often wonder that he doesn't have a problem with it, or you
Yeah,
know,
you or wouldn't have been there. So yeah, I think him and Roger and
yeah,
they both well, it was Brian and I guess I think I quote him in the book as saying this, how, you know, Queen has the legacy and Freddie has a legacy. We want to be very careful with that.
hmm
So yeah, I think they're mindful and they don't want to ruffle too many feathers.
yeah, yeah.
Whereas Elton didn't care about ruffling feathers with his movie. To the point where I think in some countries, they censored a couple scenes, so because
Yeah.
it was just too much for
Yeah.
them.
Wow. Wow. Uh, After a night at the opera, we get a day at the races. To me, it felt like an attempt to kind of replicate what had been done before. I like a day at the races, but it's not night at the opera. Um,
Mm.
and I hate the fact that White Man gets lost there. That's probably my favorite track on the record, and nobody really knows that song. So that was heartbreaking for me. But do you think and that was the end of Roy Thomas Baker's run with the band. The contract was up, and he didn't do that record. Do you think we would have gotten the same record if Roy Thomas Baker had been involved?
That's a good question. I mean, the songs come from the band,
Right.
and I think by then, and then especially after having a smash like A Night at the Opera, they asserted themselves a lot more in the studio. They didn't have to rely on a producer as much.
Right.
So, well, it
But
would have been different, but
yeah, I think he was just so inventive, like a George Martin. I constantly draw him together with George Martin. I thought they were very similar in the way that they were inventive and creative and ingenious with the recording technique. I don't know that A Day at the Races doesn't have that even without him. But I have a feeling that he might have had some influence, and we might have gotten a different record, but we'll never know.
yeah, he might have
Yeah,
said some of the material wasn't good enough and pushed them to come up with something else. I could see him
right.
doing that.
Yeah,
He
yeah.
might have pushed to make it more distinctive from Night of the Opera instead of just what I feel now is kind of a paler copy.
Right, right. That's how I felt too. Yeah. Great songs on there, of course. I love the Queen catalog, all around, really. Um, what's next for Gillian Gaar? Are you currently writing anything?
Um, well, let's see. I have another book due from Motor Books this fall on Tom Petty.
Oh,
Uh,
fantastic.
so it was in the vein of the Elton at 75 and Bruce at 75, except they've changed the name now and it's not Tom Petty at 75. Though there are 75 moments that I talk about, so it's the same format. But I think they gave it
Okay,
the title Tom Petty, the Man and His Music, or
okay.
something kind of
Great. I just had
kind of
Stan Lynch
bland.
on
But
on the show.
oh,
So
really?
yeah, yeah, and he was a delight. Yeah, great, great. Uh, Cornerstone in that sound, really. That original Tom Petty Heartbreakers thing. Fantastic. I look forward to that for sure. Is there a book you've always dreamed of writing?
Um, well, a good book about the Beatles movies, which I don't think there is one out there yet.
Yeah.
Um, Also, to be odd, like a Yoko Ono biography, which I don't think there's a good one out either.
Oh, yeah. That would be very interesting. Yeah. Yeah. Fantastic. Yeah. Well, we'll start pitching them.
Yeah, or like a song by song of Elvis. That would be a long project because I think he recorded something like 700 songs.
Wow. Wow. That would be
I
great, though.
Yeah, I did. I know it was in an article, or maybe it was a review I did. Maybe it was the box set that put out all those songs. But I said he had, in a way, he had sort of the most bizarre recording career of any recording artist ever. because he did so many different styles of songs
He really did.
throughout the 20 years. You had he didn't do jazz. I think that's that's maybe about the one you couldn't
Yeah.
say. But he
The
has, he
gospel
has
years.
folk songs
Yeah.
and gospel and country and blues and rock and roll. I guess you could say he didn't
Yeah.
do rock and roll and rock as opposed to rock and roll. I guess you could say he never did heavy metal and jazz.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
kids music, to his regret, but
Uh,
he did it. I mean, if you look at the range of material he recorded, it's really strange.
it
A
is
lot of it
great.
is because some of it, the film songs. Oh, musicals. I mean, a musical style song,
Right.
um, like from a Broadway show or something.
Hmm.
What is it? Signs of the Zodiac, from The Trouble with Girls and
Ooh.
How to Get Into It. Um, yeah, that really, you could see that at a stage show, a musical.
Yeah.
Um, so that would be interesting to dig into and just, yeah, look at each song.
Analyze all of that. Yeah. 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 Well, you'll be busy. I know you
Yeah.
will. It's great. I look
Yeah.
forward to whatever you decide to do.
Oh, well, thank you.
Yeah, the content, like I say, for this book, there'll be links. It's just this slipcase. Wow. It is just I'm telling you, folks, when you get this thing, you're going to be just amazed. It's just such a wonderful piece. And the content, of course, so great. Wonderfully written by Gillian Gar.
Oh, thank you.
Absolutely. Any book tour or signing events you got coming up?
But not for this one, no.
No? Okay.
Yeah, I actually tried to get a signing at a local store, but it was all booked up. So
Okay.
that didn't happen. But yeah, nope, nope, no signings.
Okay. Can people see what you have coming up? Keep in touch with your catalog and things like that. Any kind of website, Facebook page, anything like that?
Yeah, I really need to get a website, which I haven't done. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, on Facebook I have, I guess they call it a fan page, which is Gillian Gar Writer.
Okay.
And I'll put like, when you this goes live and there's a link, I'd put a link to that on that page.
Excellent. Sure
Um,
will.
and Twitter, yeah, still on Twitter at Gillian Gar.
All right.
So yeah, I do post things there. Gillian Gar Writer is sort of, well, Twitter, you don't see everything all at once. You just like see the one individual post.
Right. Right.
Whereas yeah, on the Facebook page, I'll have links to interviews or maybe articles I've written also. So a
Excellent.
bit broader. You can see other work and not just appearances and interviews.
Yeah. It's fantastic. Yeah, please. I'll have links. Check it out. Get the book. There's a link to buy the book down there. Yeah. Everything Jillian Gar, and we appreciate you. Thank you so much, Jillian. It's been fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. I will talk to you on the next book, maybe.
Okie doke. Sounds good.
All right, great. Take care of yourself.
You too.
All right. Bye
Aloha.
bye.